Hello, a very good afternoon to you. It's 4 minutes past 5 here on LBC. You're listening to Ian Dale at Drive. Coming up in this hour on LBC, in a radio first, I'll be hosting an hour-long debate between the Israeli ambassador Mark Regev and the Palestinian ambassador Manuel Hassassian. They're both live here with me in the studio. You can not only listen to the debate, you can watch us on the LBC website, lbc.co.uk, or on the LBC Facebook page on Facebook Live. Now, I'll take some questions from you by text, Twitter and email throughout the course of the hour, and the ambassadors will be asking each other some questions in our Ask Me Anything sessions. I think the Middle East peace process has got to restart sometime. Now is as good as any. So sit back, put your preconceptions aside, listen to what the ambassadors have to say, and I'll take your calls on what you've heard after 6. And I think that's actually really important, that we all put our preconceptions, our passionately held views aside for the next hour, because you never know, we might learn something and see things from a slightly different perspective. With me in the studio, I've already said, Mark Regev, the Israeli ambassador, Manuel Hassassian, the Palestinian ambassador. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Back in July, when I interviewed you both separately, a lot of our listeners got in touch to say how impressed they were with both of you. They wanted you to debate each other. Delighted you've agreed to do so. Let's start off with what may seem a simple question, but actually may be a little bit complex. What are the obstacles to a renewed Middle East peace process? Manuel Hassassian.
You know, the classic question, whenever I'm interviewed, why is this peace process has been stalled? And, for so many years now, we are not engaged in tete-a-tete, negotiations. My answer has always been we are stuck between the historically inevitable and the politically impossible. I think for the last 22 years, we have embarked on a peace process that lacked a clear frame of reference, not in terms of substance, but in terms of process. And that's why, we had a lot of difficulties and challenges, to overcome in a way where the politics of inclusion was not part of this ordeal. It's the question of the top dog dealing with the underdog, with the third party that has not been an honest broker for peace. So that kind of negotiations was always susceptible to be imbalanced with no parity whatsoever, that led basically to the diktat of power politics rather than negotiations. We did not look eye to eye in the negotiations process, but we looked at it from a different perspective, the occupier versus the occupied. And this is an unstarted in any kind of negotiations. I think the process has always been enigmatic and problematic for both of us to deal with the issues that are so substantive that we never even dealt with them as much as we wanted to.
I'm sure there are going to be many areas of disagreement over the course of the next hour, but I'm quite keen to find some areas of agreement too. Mark Regev, is there anything there that Manuel said that you can agree with?
First of all, allow me to start by saying you said we were going to have a debate. I hope we can have a conversation this afternoon, that we will find areas where we agree, that we can identify where we disagree, and then we can try to find ways to move forward. Look, there's a historic dispute going back 100 years between us and the Palestinians, and it's difficult to solve. If it would have been easy, it would have been done already. I think the way forward is for Israelis and Palestinians to meet directly. If we need help, that's possible, but it's probably best to do it by ourselves, eyeball to eyeball, that Israelis put on the table all our concerns, and we have real concerns, that the Palestinians put on the table their concerns, and I know they have real concerns, and then we talk. There's no substitute for direct talks between the two parties. And I would remind you, the position of the Israeli leadership over the last decade has been, we are ready for the immediate resumption of peace talks without preconditions. I'm not forcing or demanding the Palestinian side to accept upfront any of the Israeli positions. I don't think they should ask me to accept upfront any of their positions. We should come to the table with all our concerns.
So why isn't this happening? Our listeners out there who maybe aren't as familiar with the minutiae of the two sides here, we say, well, if you've got that attitude, why is nothing happening?
I think my colleague, Professor Hassan, said very clearly. He talked about, and if I misunderstood, you will correct me, he said they want terms of reference or a framework. And we see that as preconditions We see that as us up front before negotiations even starting.
How is a framework a precondition?
Well, it depends what's there. But if you want to outline what the solution is to borders, what the solution is to different issues up front before you negotiate, well, two could play that game. We could say...
isn't a framework just a list of areas to talk about?
That we can agree to. That we have no problem with that.
Is that enough of a framework?
You know, the thing is, the problem is that how could we negotiate when occupation is still going on, with the systematic policies of the Israeli government against Palestinians, with the building of settlements, demolition of houses, and the saga continues. I don't need to reiterate what Mr. Regev might consider to be polemical, but it is, facts on the ground, what is happening today. However, we want to go to the negotiating table with open spirit and open mind. Let's have a moratorium on settlements and let's release the political prisoners. They were not part of the deal.
That's a precondition.
No, it's not a precondition. The release of the political prisoners, the pre-Oslo, has never been part of this peace process. It has been agreed upon before Oslo. So why now try to put it as an obstacle and consider it a precondition? Now, the question of settlements does not it does not reflect a good intention that Israel for a two-state solution, because the geography is changing and the landscape is changing in the West Bank, let alone the demography. How could we pursue a two-state solution when there is no land to talk about, where no geographic contiguity whatsoever? So it is our right to say, let's go and negotiate. Okay, everything that we negotiate on the 6 permanent status issues is susceptible to negotiations, and you have to live up with the solutions that we both come up with, but not to preempt it, by creating facts on the ground. And this is the difference between the occupier and the occupied.
How difficult is it, though, for the Israeli government to say, okay, as a gesture of goodwill, we will put a moratorium on building new settlements in the lands that the Palestinians consider are their areas? Why is that so difficult for the Israeli government to do?
It is difficult, but we've done it. Prime Minister Netanyahu did it, 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
But there have been building of new settlements
since we did a settlement moratorium for 10 months so as to give the peace process a chance. Unfortunately, at the time, I think it was only after 9.5 months into the 10-month moratorium that actually we got the process started. I think the issue of settlements, like all the outstanding issues, has to be there for the negotiating process. In other words, I understand the professor very honestly says, what are the concerns of the Palestinians? We also have, in Israel, legitimate concerns. We're concerned about terrorism. We're concerned about incitement. We're concerned about hate speech. We're concerned about a consistent refusal to live up to past commitments. I could sit here, if I wanted to, and, blast my Palestinian colleague. I don't want to do that. We have legitimate concerns. They have very real concerns. Let's meet and talk. I don't think it's right that I say to him, this is my precondition for talking. I don't think it helps that he says to me, this is his precondition for talking.
Let me read you out something that Alastair Burt, the former Foreign Office Minister, both of you will know him. He was responsible for the Middle East. He tweeted me this question for you both. He says, there are MPs who are friends of both of you, desperate to work with you, but unsure that you both want it. Help us, help you. I mean, how keen are you for this process to start? Manuel Alsacia.
First of all, there are two realities. Occupation of Israel to Palestine is not going to end forever. It has to end somewhere. And second, there is a reality that military solution to this conflict and convulsive violence is not going to solve this issue. If we try to put those into perspective, then the only option that is left for us is negotiations. And in order to negotiate, we have to be on parity level. And we have a clear understanding that the question of mutual distrust has to be shunned away. Go to the negotiating table with the intention of finding solutions.
And that's the lesson from all other negotiations all over the world in these situations, isn't it? If there has to be an element of goodwill and trust right from the start.
That's a precondition whether we like it or not, because we cannot go there, with the idea of negotiating. Yes, I agree that there was a moratorium by Prime Minister Netanyahu 3 years ago, and it lasted almost 10 months. It is a true fact. But by the same token, he was talking about a moratorium, but settlement activities continued. There were, many who were watching exactly what was happening on the ground. So saying something and doing something, creates a certain kind of distrust.
Just on this point about trust, Jonathan on Twitter says, what's the one action that each party can make to make the other party feel confident that peace is possible in the short term? What would you want the other side to do? Just one action to enable you to trust them a little bit more than you do at the moment.
I invite President Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, to stand up and say the following words. We've had a conflict for 100 years. We want to end it. We understand that the Jewish people also have a legitimate right to national self-determination, to a state of their own, that they have a legitimate claim on their homeland, and that we will find a way to live together. I think if he said that, that would revolutionize the dialogue.
Is that unreasonable? And also, what would you like the other side to say? One thing that
before
could make
I
you
say
trust
what the other side should say. President Abbas has recognized the state of Israel. We recognize the state of Israel as a legitimate state in our part of the world. The problem is that Israel is not recognizing our state. Why can't Israel recognize our state on the borders of 1967 and then sit state to state and negotiate, the 6 permanent issues? We have already accepted, but the PLO has recognized the state of Israel. So the question of recognition is out of the question now. We are looking beyond the recognition of the state of Israel. We have made our painful concession. We have accepted 22% of historic Palestine, and we want to have our own independent state where there is geographic contiguity, but not with an apartheid wall 700 kilometers with 3 clusters of settlements that divide the West Bank into 3 parts with no geographic contiguity. Jerusalem is separated. Gaza is not linked to the West Bank. And then they talk about a 2-state solution. What 2-state solution is left for us to talk about? It's a delusion.
So is that the one, because that's quite a big thing, is that the one thing that you would like them to do to instill a little bit of trust?
No, I would like them to stop settlements, release the political prisoners. Let's go back to the negotiating table. It's inevitable because we are determined, both of us, and we are convinced Israel has won 5 major wars in the Middle East. Did it bring security to its own individual? No. I believe the ending of military solution is a solution by itself towards peace.
Ant has tweeted, how can you both remove religious extremism from the equation? The Israeli government has to rely on religious parties in order to form a coalition, and Gaza is under the control of Hamas. Aren't those the main 2 roadblocks to peace? Mark Regev.
Look, Israel, we have a system of elections like there was a proposal to do it here, proportional representation. And proportional representation means that you have not a 2-party system, not a 3-party system, but I think we have 12 political parties in our Knesset.
Which is a lesson to us not to do it.
I'd probably agree with that. And that means all governments have to be coalition governments because no single party ever gets a majority. And so, of course, historically, we've had religious parties in most of our coalitions.
And some of them, let's face it, pretty extreme.
It depends on different issues. No, on different issues. Some of them are very conservative on social issues. Some of them more hawkish on defense issues. Some of them are less hawkish. And it's true, you will find some extremists, religious extremists, but you'll also find rabbis going out there trying to engage with imams. You'll find people who are very religious and also searching for solutions. You'll find people who are very strong in their religious beliefs but very moderate on their political beliefs. In other words, there's not necessarily always a correlationship between religious piety and between extreme politics.
But what it means is that Mr. Netanyahu always has to look over his shoulder so he doesn't offend these people too much.
Let's be clear, when he wants to say something, he'll say it. And he said, and I'd repeat it now in front of my colleague, if he can reach a deal with the Palestinians, right? If he can sign a peace treaty with President Abbas, he said he'll take that to the Knesset, and then he'll take it to the Israeli people in a referendum. And I think the logic behind that is if Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's known for being tough on security, if he can find a deal that's good for him, then he will get overwhelming support from the Israeli public. And that's why I say to the Palestinians, why I say today, I think by not engaging with the Israeli government, by refusing to negotiate, by putting these preconditions on the table, I think the Palestinian leadership is not doing its own people a favor, because the way to solve this problem is with strong leaders taking difficult choices. And I know that Netanyahu is a strong leader who's willing to walk that extra mile for peace.
Well, of course, referendums can be a little dangerous, can't they? Manuel, what about the issue of Hamas in Gaza? Because you can sit here as a very reasonable representative of the Palestinian Authority, which is essentially Fatah. But Hamas is a very different kettle of fish, and you can't speak for them, can you? Aren't they your equivalent of some of the... I'm going to get into a lot of trouble for making this equation, probably, but that is a roadblock to peace, isn't it? The fact that you have Hamas there in the background.
First of all, let me tell you, Mr. Ian, that I don't represent only the authority. I am the PLO representative, and I represent the Palestinian people in the United Kingdom. So I represent Hamas too.
Okay.
Now, the difference is that 99.5% of the Palestinians are Sunni Muslims. So Islam as a religion is the state religion. Now, Hamas is a political Islam group that has an ideology, okay, which is completely different than the pragmatic approach of our Palestinian Authority, Mr. Abbas. They believe in armed struggle, they believe in resistance. Mr. Abbas, my president, does not believe in that. He is a pragmatist who chooses between constraints. He embarked on a peace process and had collaborated with the Israelis on security issues. And we have given up everything. And we have been, as authority, accused as collaborators, quislings. And we have done everything possible to let the negotiations, succeed. In the final analysis, we haven't seen, the president being empowered by the Israeli side. Now, Hamas has never negotiated with Israel. Hamas is not part of the PLO. The PLO
and
with
Hamas
President
does not
Abbas,
recognize Israel, does it?
Well, Hamas does not recognize Israel. Neither Fatah does not recognize Israel. It's the PLO that recognizes Israel. And the peace that we have, the Oslo Agreement, were signed between the PLO and the State of Israel. Now, when we talk about peace, we're talking about the PLO. Why do we have always to take Hamas to factor it as, an impediment? The peace process could go without Hamas. It has been without Hamas, and it continue to go without Hamas. But we haven't seen any clear signs from the Israelis, because of the settlements, because of the reasons that I have mentioned, that Israel is not serious.
Isn't that a chink of light there, though, that you could negotiate without Hamas being present at all?
Two things. First, we're willing to negotiate today. We put no preconditions whatsoever. We're willing to sit down immediately and start talks. I have to take issue with something, not that the professor said, but something that you said, Ian. The comparison between the Israeli religious political parties and Hamas.
Well, I
don't think there's a single Israeli political party in the Knesset, yes, that supports knifing innocent civilians, that support shooting rockets at innocent civilians.
And I completely accept that.
I think Hamas is identified across the world as a terrorist organization, and you can disagree with this or that other theocratic party in Israel, but it's not in the same league.
So you don't think that Hamas is an impediment to the peace process?
And I don't think, Hamas should be, a potent factor in this equation. If Prime Minister Netanyahu says that I'm willing to go and speak with the president of Abbas and vice versa, let's meet, sit down and talk and put all the issues on the on the table. And let us not, make the mistakes of incrementalism, just go to the final status, put all the issues on the table and let's have a white smoke. I don't think my president will say no.